Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Finance Bill, not amended in committee and as amended in Public Bill Committee, to be considered.
Now.
We will begin with new clause 1, with which it will be convenient to consider other selected new clauses and amendments as listed on the selection paper. I call James Wilde to move new clause 1.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'll be moving new clause 1, 2, 3 and speaking to amendments 67 to 69 tabled in my name. It's now 124 days since the Chancellor delivered the first Labour budget in 14 years, the so-called growth budget. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, it feels like longer. Inflation is up, taxes are up, borrowing is up, unemployment's up, energy bills are up. I could go on, but most tellingly of all, growth is down. The Bank of England has just cut its growth forecast for this year in half to just only 0.75%. Little wonder that business confidence has plummeted, with firms warning of fewer jobs, lower wages and higher prices. And instead of backing risk-takers and supporting wealth creators, as we on this side of the House do, this is a finance bill and a budget that attacks enterprise, delivers lower growth, higher borrowing and higher taxes. I'll turn now to new clause number 1, Madam Deputy Speaker, concerning pensioners. Millions of pensioners were left out in the cold this winter when the government took away their winter fuel payments. Now millions only in receipt of the state pension face paying income tax on it. I would happily give way.
I'm grateful for the Shadow Minister giving way. When the government decided to take away the winter fuel payments, one of the things they said was you could go for pension credit to try and get some support. The problem is there are huge delays in getting pension credit. When it was first put out, it was 84 days. 500 new staff have been brought in, but it's still 56 days above the 50-day limit that's supposed to be there. Does he share my concerns? This is the problem, that these people are now passed through winter and still don't have the funds that they're entitled to under this government, and they're not there.
I absolutely agree. My honourable friend, who's done stellar work in drawing those delays and the waiting times to get that data out of the department. And of course, we know if everyone who took up pension credit who's entitled to it did so, that would wipe out the savings that the Chancellor wanted. So the idea that she wanted all of those people to take up pension credit, I think, is for the birds. So this amendment would require the government to review how many people receiving the new state pension at the full rate will be liable to pay income tax in the coming years. In the general election, we were very clear that people only in receipt of the state pension should not pay income tax on it. However, recent forecasts suggest that an estimated 9 million pensioners will pay income tax on their state pension from April 2026. Pensioners can't easily alter their financial situation, yet they were given just 6 months' notice that they would be losing their winter fuel allowance, so they cannot be blindsided for a second time by the taxman. At the committee, the Minister said the data on this was available, but I don't think that is correct, because the figures he referred to do not break down the cohort, the group that we're talking about here, recipients of the full rate of the new state pension. So will he commit to publishing data on how many people receiving the new state pension will pay income tax on it? And this potential hit could not come at a worse time for pensioners. Having lost the winter fuel payments, we learned last week that energy bills are going up yet again, far cry from the £300 cut that they were all promised at the last election by the party opposite. And Madam Deputy Speaker, at the budget, the Chancellor also made much of her announcement that she would uprate the personal tax thresholds in line with inflation from 2028. However, that is not legislated for in this bill, and the public are being asked to take the government at face value. Yet recent reports suggest this promise may be dropped, given the impact of the budget on growth and higher borrowing. So given the number of broken promises we've seen since the election, can the Minister reconfirm from the dispatch box the government's commitment to unfreeze those thresholds in 2028? And as well as pensioners, it's working people that cannot afford the cost of this Labour government. Working people that the Prime Minister promised at the election he would not hit with higher taxes, and then broke that promise with the £25 billion a year jobs tax. I happily give way.
Mr Osborne.
Can I thank the my right honourable friend? Can he just confirm which government it was that left taxes at a 70-year high, and also which government led to interest rates at a record high and inflation at a record high that stung so many mortgage holders?
James Wilde.
Well, the last government had to deal with a global pandemic and an energy price shock. But I'm happy to enlighten the honourable gentleman who obviously hasn't read the Red Book. Taxes are going up. They're going up to record high levels under the budget and this finance bill that he is supporting. So if he's worried about the tax burden, then he shouldn't be voting for this finance bill today. And households are facing financial challenges, and the measures in this bill will only make things worse. The OBR predicts that real household disposable income will fall by 1.25% by the start of 2029, largely due to the measures in the budget. So new Clause 3 requires the Chancellor to publish an assessment of the impact of the changes on household finances. It's the choices that this Chancellor and this government have seen that means borrowing is increasing, meaning interest rates will be higher for longer, people's mortgages will be higher, and see hard-working families paying billions of pounds to pay off the debt interest. The government inherited inflation at target. Since then, inflation's gone up, meaning less money in people's pockets. And while it's the Chancellor's wider mishandling of the economy that's attracting the headlines, the measures in this bill will have a direct role in squeezing households. Whether it's higher stamp duty, increased alcohol duty, air passenger duty, capital gains increases, vehicle excise duty, or changes to the tax treatment of hybrid vehicles and many other measures in this bill, the costs of this bill will be felt directly by households across the UK. And when households are stretched, it's essential we have transparency about what the actions of the government is taking are doing to their incomes. Give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. Of course, the big measure in the budget on tax raising was, as my honourable friend says, the national insurance contributions rise, 25 billion impact on the economy. And yet, once you've taken off compensation for the public services and the negative impact on activity, it only nets about 10 billion. It's a peculiarly ridiculous policy that nets only 10 billion or 11 billion, and yet, according to the OBR's numbers, takes 19 billion out of people's pay packets. Surely, does my honourable friend agree, there has never been a more ridiculous measure that costs so much and delivers so little?
James Wilde.
Well, I think my honourable friend makes the point that this measure may have been introduced by a Chancellor who didn't actually understand the impact that it was going to have, and actually they should have stuck to the promise they made at the election not to increase national insurance at all. I turn to new Clause 2 concerning the government's plan to undermine our energy security by increasing the energy profits levy to 38%, bringing the headline rate on oil and gas activities to 78%, extending the tax by a year and removing investment allowances. And the consequences? Fairly predictably. Offshore Energies UK has said that the hike will choke off billions of pounds of investment in the North Sea, putting 35,000 jobs at risk. I give way to the honourable member.
Does my honourable friend not agree that if such a rate is good enough for Norway, a clean energy superpower, is it not good enough for the United Kingdom?
In short, no, I don't, and that's why we voted against it previously. We should be maximising our homegrown energy, not undermining domestic production, and choosing to rely instead on importers with higher carbon emissions.
I agree entirely with the Shadow Minister. Isn't the point the Prime Minister has come to this dispatch box only today to talk about how economy is security. Security starts with our defence and looking after ourselves, including energy security, as the question came. So isn't it ridiculous to not use our North Sea oil, our own reserves, to make sure we have that security, the cleaner side of oil and gas too, as well as the jobs, all without importing it in a volatile world?
James Wilde.
Absolutely. I wonder if, when the Prime Minister was in Washington last week, he had the opportunity to talk to President Trump about homegrown energy and the importance of supporting your domestic sector. And that's what we on the side of the House certainly support, because this is a sector that has 200,000 high-skilled jobs. So it's important that we have an up-to-date assessment of the impact of what the government's doing on our domestic energy production, energy security, energy prices and the UK economy. And unfortunately, we're already seeing some of the impact. The US firm Apache has already said that it will end its operations in the North Sea by the end of 2029, blaming the increase and extension of the profits levy for making that uneconomic beyond that. And as members will rightly...
I'm so grateful to my honourable friend, because the absurdity of this is it's vying with the national insurance contributions change to be the most absurd measure. And I think by a head it wins, because we have a Prime Minister saying we must have energy security. We've got a climate change committee that says we'll still need oil and gas for 25% of our energy needs if we meet net zero in 2050. And they will have no more licences. So we lose tens of thousands of jobs, tens of billions of tax, and the very engineering capability that we need to have the transition. It's absurd on every single possible front.
My
honourable friend is 100% correct, and I think we all know the architect of much of this is the Energy Secretary. He takes a rather fundamentalist approach to this and wants to cover farmland with solar farms and wants to undermine our oil and gas sector. We on this side disagree. And it was the previous government who introduced this levy in the first place. But that was to tackle extraordinary profits at an extraordinary time, and the revenue helped to keep energy bills lower for all of our constituents. But now the government is ratcheting up the levy and seems to want to tax North Sea exploration out of existence. And this is just a further example of the government's ill-conceived energy policy, with GB Energy and net zero vanity project that won't generate any energy or be an energy supplier and certainly won't deliver £300 off bills. The final amendments 67 to 69 tabled in my name would remove clause 47 and abolish Labour's education tax. Since the 1st of January, independent school fees for education and vocational training have been subject to VAT at 20%. The first time that education has been subject to VAT. And why is that? Because education is a public good, so we do not tax it. And putting VAT on independent schools particularly hurts those on the most modest incomes who've chosen to save and make sacrifices to send their children to a school that they think will serve them best. I give way to...
Thank you, Minister, for giving way. It's one of the issues later on I'd like to make a comment on. We have a number of faith schools in Northern Ireland who will be impacted greatly by these fees, and they have contacted me even at this late stage to ask would government reconsider that point. Does he agree that the faith schools will be impacted more than perhaps others, and the impact on the parents and the children in particular will be gross?
James Wild.
Well, I do agree with my honourable friend on that point, and obviously everyone will have an opportunity, if this amendment is moved and selected for a vote to strip this measure out of the bill. And none of those parents on modest incomes are getting a tax break. They're also contributing to fund places in the state sector, whether or not they take them up. Ultimately, this is a tax on aspiration, and it's one we oppose. And at committee, we raised the concerns about the impact on certain groups, including children with special educational needs, small schools, faith schools, and indeed military families. I'll give way to my friend.
Grateful to my honourable friend, who's been very generous, and he's just touched on the issue of children with special educational needs, because this isn't just about scrimping parents making a choice. This is about people with no choice. People whose children have been bullied, who have other special needs that just haven't been met in the state sector and have made the sacrifice to go in the private sector. And those people with children in particular need are going to pay the price of this ill-thought-through measure.
Well, once again, my honourable friend is consistent in being absolutely right. And the point is that there are more than 100,000 pupils in independent schools with SEND who do not have an education, health and care plan. So I'm not sure if the honourable lady knows, but they will have to pay VAT on those places. That is not covered by the government. I give way to the honourable member.
Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way? Is it not true, however, that SEN students are exempt in this proposal?
Yes, they are.
And is it not a surprise? Is it not a surprise that whilst the opposition is focused on this, the very small number that go to independent schools, we are focused on ensuring that we have good education for the large majority of our children in state schools?
James Wild.
I'm afraid the honourable gentleman is flat wrong. Children with SEND who do not have an education, health and care plan, who go to an independent school, have to pay the 20% VAT. So I would hope people who are voting on this legislation may have understood that fairly fundamental point. And that will make those places unaffordable for parents of many, add pressures to the state system with demand for places where there's no capacity, and squeeze council budgets. But this is just another part of the Education Secretary's ideological approach that seeks to divide. We care about all children on this side. We simply believe parents should be able to choose the school that is best for their child. And we're seeing the impact in real time. The government's own estimates suggested there'll be 100 schools closing over the next 3 years. A school in the Prime Minister's own constituency has said it will close this summer due to the impact of VAT as well as the jobs tax. School closures, dedicated staff losing their jobs, children having their education disrupted. That's the effect of this policy, and I hope that members will support our amendment today. And Madam Deputy Speaker, on this side of the House, we welcome inward investors, we back wealth creators and risk takers. And as this government is chasing growth, one would think they might be sending a message that Britain is open for business. But the plans for non-DOMs, including inheritance tax, have already caused a significant exodus of investors from the UK. Last year, over 10,000 net millionaires left the country, a 157% increase compared to the year before. That is the equivalent, the Adam Smith Institute estimates, to losing the income tax take of over 500,000 average taxpayers. Now, at Davos, and we discussed this in committee, the Chancellor said she would amend this proposal as they made the UK less attractive. But frankly, the damage is already done. The Chartered Institute of Taxation has warned that with a lack of proper consideration and consultation, the amendments introduced that we're discussing this evening still leave uncertainty which is counterproductive if the intention is to encourage those people to stay and to lay concerns about those looking to invest into the UK.
Luke Evans.
The Shadow Minister is absolutely correct. She said, the Chancellor at Davos said she had listened to that community. Why does she make changes for that community, yet not the farming community or the pensioner community or the pupils at private schools or SEND communities, or indeed those working businesses such as pubs, restaurants, charities who are all seeing tax increases? Why was that community listened to and none others? Does he have an idea of why that could be the case?
James Wilde.
My humble friend invites me to get inside the head of the Chancellor. I'm not sure that I would be able to do that. All I know is that those other groups that he talks about should also be listened to. The Chancellor has shown herself to be timid, particularly on farming and impact on family farms and businesses of those changes. Hence, there is tomorrow yet another protest. And I read at the weekend another brave Labour MP coming out and saying that he opposed these changes and wanted to see reforms. And perhaps some of the others are here to speak this afternoon to say that they too stand with the farmers in their constituency. To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister and Chancellor set growth as the mission for this government. They inherited an economy growing at the fastest rate in the G7. But their choices in the budget and in this finance bill have stopped growth stone dead. They've hiked taxes, they've undermined business confidence, they've pushed up inflation and hit working people and pensioners. Later this month, we will get the economic and fiscal forecasts. But what we can already see is a Labour government committed to higher taxes, higher spending and higher borrowing, and we're all paying the price.
New Clause 1. Review of impact of Section 1 on recipients of the full rate of the new state pension.
The question is that new Clause 1 be read a second time. Dr. Jeevun Sandher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for allowing me to rise and speak in this debate. Economic growth, the ability to produce more with less, it is the foundation of all human progress. It's why we aren't all scratching around in the dirt, desperately hoping something will grow. But there is no economic law that says that when the economy grows, all must share in it. And in decades past, it has not. Growth has gone to high earners over everyone else, the old rather than the young, to capital over labour, and to London versus everywhere else. This is tearing our democracy apart, and it is tearing others apart. And that is why I'm so proud to speak in favour of this finance bill that will help ensure that economic growth is shared between all people and all places. Madam Deputy Speaker, before entering this place, I used to work as an economist. My PhD was on the causes and consequences of inequality. This chamber may know that. And particularly on why, since the 1980s, people and places have not shared equally in growth. Now, in my adult life, I've never known a growing economy, and now my beard is turning grey. And I want to see... I know, right? I'm going to look like Gandalf by the end of this, but I want to see the dotted line on that chart labelled GDP finally going up. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is not enough. We have to ask, are all sharing in that growth? Growth for where and growth for whom? And the only way to ensure that all sharing growth is for government, indeed this government, to act. Because when people do not share in growth, when their incomes do not rise, when life becomes worse, hope turns to cynicism, happiness to anger, and peace to riots. Now, there are 4 ways that growth has not been shared by all, and we are fixing all 4 in this budget. Firstly, across high-income nations, top earners have seen their pay rise far faster than the rest. Technological change destroyed manufacturing jobs and led to a divided labour market with high and low-paid jobs. High-pay workers benefited from new technology, computers, Excel and PowerPoint. And those high-pay workers saw their wages increase 50% faster than the average. Now, we're helping fixing that in this budget by investing in the skills of non-graduates, in more money for further education colleges and apprenticeships. Secondly, older generations have benefited from cheaper homes, while younger renters cannot buy a home, because we have failed to build enough homes in this country. 20 years ago, house prices 3 times the average wage. Today, they're more than 8 times the average wage.
On that point?
Yes, I will give way.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way. Would he agree with me that one thing that could be done very quickly would be for this government to legislate that all Airbnbs, for example, need to have planning permission to be Airbnbs, because that would release a lot of short-term lets back into the market for longer-term lets by younger people?
Dr Jeevun Sandher.
I thank the honourable member. I'm sure the government will consider these measures in the round, but more broadly as well, on the side of that, of course, it's about building just a lot more homes. 40% of 18 to 34-year-olds at one moment are living with mum and dad. And that is what we are starting to fix in this budget. A 20% increase in the Affordable Homes Programme, a stepping stone to the 1.5 million homes. I'll first of all give way to this member.
Very grateful to my Leicestershire colleague, and he will know that housing targets and housing numbers have gone up in Leicestershire. In my patch, it's up by 59% and 73%. However, in the Leicester City, they're dropping by 31%. Why is that the case when they have brownfield sites, the best connection? Surely, if it's the case that we need houses everywhere, shouldn't we see houses being built in the city at the same time, not just in the countryside?
Dr Jeevun Sandher.
Well, the housing formula has rightfully been changed to where the need is most. But I think about my constituency, for example, those brownfield sites. I've seen derelict factories not have planning permission approved for new homes. I've seen too much and too few homes being built and too many things being rejected. So I'm very proud of this government's aim to build new homes. I have full faith in the formula, and look, we need more homes everywhere, including in both of our constituencies. I believe the honourable member here would have a point.
Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend is making an excellent point and an excellent speech, if I may say so. I think he is right to highlight the importance of housing, and the importance of housing both in terms of quality of life for our residents, but also labour mobility and many other benefits to the economy. He's absolutely right about that. And if I may commend to him the good example of Reading, where there are many brownfield sites which are being redeveloped. And in fact, the honourable gentleman opposite may wish to visit Berkshire and see how well we are rebuilding in our town centres in our part of the country, and indeed many other cities and towns are around the country.
Dr Jeevun Sandher.
Couldn't agree more. Perhaps we should all take a trip to Reading and see the great work they're doing over there, because there is a lot more homes we have to build, and indeed for my generation now finding more and more that working hard, getting a good job is not a guarantee of earning or owning a home at the end, and that is what this government is fixing, and indeed it is what this budget is fixing. But alongside as well the young not sharing in growth, we have another side of this as well, that is growth have gone to capital over labour. Technological change, meaning machines can do tasks far more cheaply that humans used to do. More payments to capital, it means less to workers. The labour share of income of GDP falling by 1/6 since deindustrialisation. And today, as we've seen across the Atlantic, some of the dangers of Bidenomics in one moment should teach us.
Can I just remind the honourable member that it's imperative he speaks to the finance bill and the amendments in it, not rehash a budget speech. Dr. Jeevun Sandher.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, look, this is a budget that is investing in the future and is indeed changing this country. It is a budget that is moving forward, but look, I do want to cover some of the other bits of this finance bill, indeed the bits that it covers. It is a budget that is investing, a finance bill that is investing in labour-intensive sectors like early years childcare and the Warm Homes Plan. Yes.
Very much enjoying the honourable member's speech, and in order to give him a few minutes to gather his thoughts, remind him, as the Madam Deputy Chair did, this is the Finance Bill report, new clause 1. So new clause 1 is in relation to state pensions. And this new clause would require a review of how many people receiving the new state pension at the full rate are liable to pay income tax this year and in the next 4 tax years, and specifically what the tax liability of the state pension income would be. Would the honourable member care to provide this House with his thoughts on new clause 1?
Dr. Jeevun Sandher.
For his help and assistance in this matter. The aim here is not only on the other side of it, on the one side to help absolutely improve pensioner incomes. Look, on the one side on the tax change, but on the other side, the triple lock, it will ensure that the amount going to those pensioners will increase by £400 come April. And indeed, seeing the triple lock, as I think we'd agree across this House, has helped pensioners immeasurably. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's right at this point that I draw this speech to a close. I'd like to thank all the honourable members for their help in this debate at this moment. And I would also say that I would like to thank yourself as well at this moment. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak to you new clauses 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and add a few additional comments at the end. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. New clause 4, tabled in my name, is a review of the impact of the Act on small and medium-sized enterprises, and this new clause would require an impact assessment to be conducted. Madam Deputy Speaker, we've rehearsed in this House many times the impact of the government's budget on small and medium-sized enterprises, including through the national insurance contributions rise, the changes to business rates, and of course in the finance bill, and also of course also plans to change IHT and BPR as well. We are very concerned about the impact of the budget as a whole on small and medium-sized enterprises, the impact on our high street in particular, and of course on family businesses. It's really inconceivable that this is going ahead without an impact assessment, and we would urge the government to look at doing this. New clause 5, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a clause that would require the Chancellor to assess and publish a report on how tax changes in this Act impact households at various income levels. We all know, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the cost of borrowing is at a 30-year high, and after the misery of the mini-budget, mortgage holders in particular will be particularly concerned about that. And just as we are concerned about some of the things in the Finance Bill, we are concerned about things that are not in the Finance Bill. We are concerned, and we outlined this in our reasoned amendment against the bill at second reading, that it does not include measures to reverse the winter fuel payment cuts. And more recently, we Liberal Democrats have called for an energy social tariff as well, and I hope the government considers this in due course. Madam Deputy Speaker, new clause 6 would require the government to produce a report setting out the fiscal impact of the bill's changes to the Energy Profits Levy investment expenditure relief. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we have said in this House many times, it was the Liberal Democrats who first called for a windfall tax on the big oil and gas companies. In the last Parliament it was introduced, but 7 months after we first called for it, and it also included a very large loophole. Had it been raised sooner and without the loophole, it would have raised significantly more money that could have been used for an emergency home insulation scheme to reduce people's energy usage, which would be better for the environment and also better for people's pockets as well. This particular clause is a measure that would enable the government to publish how much money they will be raising through this particular measure, and if that were to go ahead, we would of course encourage them to look at how much money could have been raised had the measure been introduced when we first called for it. Madam Deputy Speaker, new clause 7 is a clause that would require the government to produce an impact assessment of the effect of the VAT provisions in the Act on pupils who have special educational needs but do not have an education, health and care plan. We know that the government has introduced an exception for children who do have an EHCP plan, but as members of this House on all sides will know, there are children who do have diagnosed special educational needs, or in some cases are awaiting that diagnosis, who do not have an education, health and care plan. In my own constituency, for example, we have a double whammy. The Conservative-led county administration has received the worst possible Ofsted rating for their SEND services, and at the same time we have been severely disadvantaged by the very outdated funding formula, which puts Hertfordshire at a huge disadvantage. At the moment it would take us 15 years to catch up with neighbouring Buckinghamshire in terms of the money that we would have per pupil, and even neighbouring Buckinghamshire joins us in the bottom 40 worst funded councils in the country. So clearly we want that funding formula to be fixed. We also want to see our local service provision improved as well. But fundamentally, there are many families who are struggling with the SEND service. Like many other members, I'm sure, I've received a number of emails from constituents who recognise that in St Albans we are very, very lucky. We are very blessed with a number of very high-performing, sometimes outstanding state schools. And yet some families recognise they may have 1 or 2 children in a state school, but because of the particular needs of one of their children, they may choose to put one child in a private school. And amongst the examples, there was just one that really stood out to me. A particular family contacted me to say that they have other children who are in state schools, but one particular child was not getting on well in the state school. So they chose to put this child into a private school. And it was only at that point that that private school then contacted the state school, and particularly the SEND department, to find out whether any support had previously been put in place. It turns out that their child had been put through a range of assessments that she had completed, and she had performed quite poorly and was well below the acceptable levels of processing and comprehension. But even though she had gone through these assessments, no additional support had been put in place, apart from awarding extra time, because it was simply not possible. I will give way.
Caliskan.
Thank you very much. And may I ask the member, isn't that precisely the point? The fact that our state system doesn't have the capacity or the means to be able to support children who need special educational needs, and the additional £1 billion investment, in part that will be raised through getting rid of the VAT exemption, will help deliver not only the 6,500 new teachers, but also the additional support for special educational needs children in our state system.
Hear, hear. Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable member for her intervention. We disagree on this point. Fundamentally, we Liberal Democrats have said that we should rise the tide for all children, and we don't believe that involves lowering the tide for some in particular. We had a very ambitious agenda for education in our manifesto in the general election last year. Some areas we had in common, some areas not with the Labour Party, but we had a very ambitious agenda for education, including having a specific government ring-fenced high needs budget as well. I have campaigned in this House on improving SEND provision relentlessly for the last 5 or 6 years in this chamber and Westminster Hall debates and various meetings, but we do not think that this particular measure is a measure that is needed in order to improve school funding and SEND funding in particular. We think there are other measures that could be used. So it's a difference. It's a difference of opinion about how you raise that money. I will give way.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and her response to the Honourable Lady opposite is perfectly good in its own way, of course. But I'd also suggest that, of course, the new clause she suggests simply asks to look at the impact, to measure the impact, to look at whether the damage is too great to justify in that broader sense, and therefore I would hope that the government would consider looking at this, taking it seriously, and following the arguments put by the Honourable Lady.
Cooper.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for saying this, for highlighting that this is indeed about an impact assessment. Colleagues on Labour benches will be aware that this measure is going to come into effect very, very quickly, but it will not provide the instant support that many of these children need right now. You know, if you disrupt children's education, immediately means that they will then suffer disadvantages in their life. If this was a measure that the government really wanted to pursue, I would have hoped at the very least it would have been in a few years' time to allow that for that adjustment. But we are where we are, Madam Deputy Speaker. We don't support it, but we do at the very least request, as the honourable member has suggested, having an impact assessment on this particular measure. Madam Deputy Speaker, new Clause 8 on alcohol duties. This is a clause that would require the government to produce an impact assessment of the measures on the Act on distilleries, wine producers and the hospitality industry. Madam Deputy Speaker, since 2022 I have tabled numerous questions in this House, had letters written to the Treasury about the fact with evidence of falling tax receipts and falling sales as a result of these planned measures which the Labour government are now introducing. These measures will introduce huge amounts of red tape, they'll be very complicated, they'll be very, very costly, and ultimately they will push up prices for consumers as well as for the industry.
Can my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
Thank you for giving way. May I draw the House to my entry in the Register of Members' Interest? I would like to voice my support for her amendment, which would require the government to review the impact of alcohol duty increases on key sectors. Scotch whisky is one of Britain's greatest industries, accounting for 22% of the whole of Britain's food and drinks exports and supporting tens of thousands of jobs. Yet, despite repeated assurances from this government, the industry continues to face sharply rising duty costs. Since the duty on Scotch and other spirits was...
Order! I think the honourable member's intervention is slightly too long. He is on the list to speak in due course, so maybe he can make his point about the importance of Scotch whisky then. Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising the plight of Scotch whisky. My husband is an Ayrshire boy, and he's certainly doing his part to keep the Scotch whisky industry going. Notwithstanding, it would help if the government did not pursue these particular duties. Near my constituency, it was in my constituency before boundary changes, is a particular importer of fine wines, Madam Deputy Speaker, and one of their products is port. Now, port is not the kind of drink that many people sit and glug and glug and glug like they might do. Like they might do with a cheaper form of alcohol. But for most people, Madam Deputy Speaker, for most families around the United Kingdom, port is the kind of drink that somebody might buy for an occasion, for a birthday or for Christmas or for a wedding or something of that kind. It is not typically the kind of drink that somebody might glug, with the exception of a few people in the House, in such volumes as other alcoholic drinks. And nonetheless, they will be impacted by these measures, and it will really affect, quite frankly, a huge amount of innovation in this industry, which is a prize to our economy. I will give way.
I'm going to just cast the Honourable Lady's mind back to his mentioned Scotch whisky. I met the Irish trade industry in relation for whiskies as well just there before Christmas, and they told me they had deep concerns over jobs, employment and future of their distilleries and the jobs that they have. And I mentioned Inch Distillery, the Redemont Distillery and Ecklenville Distillery as the three people in particular in my constituency that have those concerns. So the Honourable Lady is right to pursue this on behalf of them.
Yeah.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for adding his support, and I hope that he will join us in the voting lobbies later. Madam Deputy Speaker, just finally, just touch very briefly on the government's own amendments they've introduced. Needless to say that the Chartered Institute of Taxation has provided a very comprehensive briefing to all MPs on the 57 amendments to Part 2 of the bill. I think it's fair to say that the government's proposals on non-dom has become a little bit hodgepodge. The Chartered Institute is now strongly advocating for proper consultation. They warn of uncertainty, which has been introduced through these particular measures, and they have also warned that the drafting of some of the amendments may inadvertently achieve the opposite of what the government is trying to achieve. So I would simply, on that note, Madam Deputy Speaker, encourage ministers to meet with the Chartered Institute and to heed their warnings to ensure that this is properly drafted, to make sure that there isn't any uncertainty that is introduced through them. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we Liberal Democrats have tabled a number of clauses, and as we push them to a vote, we hope that colleagues across the House join us. Thank you.
Jim Dickson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure once again to contribute to the debate on this important piece of legislation. A number of amendments have been tabled by members across the House, and while I don't have time to cover them all, I will address the key ones. And as I said at the Committee of the Whole House previously, this is a crucial bill that underpins the new government's aim of fixing a tax system which has become less fair and less sustainable over the last 14 years of Conservative government. And I'm conscious of the need to confine my remarks to the amendments rather than the bill itself. But I want to remind everyone that this bill was necessary because of the dire economic inheritance that this government found on entering office last year. I'm very happy to give way.
Grateful to the honourable gentleman giving way. He said that the tax system had become less fair over the 14 years. Is that because he opposes an increase in the tax burden paid by the higher paid? Because that's what happened over the 14 years. Is he opposed to does he not see it as fair that those on lower and average earnings actually saw their share of the tax take go down? Is he opposed to that? What way, precisely, from his deep understanding of the tax system over the last 14 years, has he concluded that it became less fair?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, taxes, when the last government left office, were at the highest level for 70 years. Thresholds have been frozen, bringing more people into higher tax rates than was fair on those workers, and the Labour government is dedicated to try to make sure, before he intervenes, make sure that taxes are paid by those with the broadest shoulders and the best able to pay them. If I might make just a little bit of progress before you intervene once more, that would be lovely. Members on the front benches opposite have tabled clauses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 8, which create a requirement on the government to undertake a number of reviews of the impact of measures included in this legislation. And these range from requiring the Chancellor, that the Chancellor commissions and publishes an assessment of the expected impact of changes to the energy, oil and gas profits levy on domestic energy production, the UK's energy security, energy prices and the UK economy, to requiring the Chancellor to publish an assessment of the changes in this bill on the finances of households at a range of different income levels. I would gently remind the members opposite that much of the information requested is already available, with details on tax liabilities published by the HMRC, the DWP and the OBR, and the impacts of the changes set out in documents published at the autumn budget, including in the tax information and impact note and the impact on households report. I'm happy to give way.
Away on that point, and while we as politicians are able to read and scrutinise those real impacts, when a pensioner now has to pay tax on their state pension and they will have to do a self-assessment tax or pay it back, how will he explain that to those pensioners when they come to him in his constituency surgery to explain exactly what is going on? Because they don't have the technical ability, many will, but some won't, to understand why they're now being taxed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention? He seems remarkably well informed already about the impact of the changes in the budget, and I would imagine honourable members across this House will also be similarly informed already. The Leader of the Opposition has outlined her desire for a British equivalent of Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. I wonder how she can square that desire with these amendments, which, if passed, would seem to duplicate work already done by government. Hardly a model of efficiency, more like, in my view, playing politics. I'm happy to give way.
Cooper.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way. In our Liberal Democrats' new Clause 8 on alcohol pricing, the member will see that we're not asking just for an impact assessment of the taxation that is raised, but also for an assessment and estimation of the administrative and operational costs for the preceding 12 months that have already been incurred by this fantastic part of our industry. Would he agree with me that an impact assessment of the red tape is important as well as the tax tape for the Treasury?
Thank you. Can I thank the honourable member for that intervention? It would seem to me that by writing to the Chancellor of the Exchequer and by putting down parliamentary questions requesting that information, it would be more than possible for her to gain the data that she's requiring and therefore to be able to make her case, no doubt, across this House. New Clause 2 refers to the Government's changes to the oil and gas profits levy. These crucial changes, which see an increase in the rate of the levy to 38% from 35%, and in total will raise £6 billion to underpin investment in delivering on our missions, getting the NHS back on its feet and supporting growth across the country are laudable changes in the budget. And I wouldn't want to support any of the amendments tonight which will put these benefits at risk. New Clause 4, tabled by the honourable member for St Albans, would require the Chancellor to conduct an impact assessment of the Act on small and medium-sized enterprises. I'm sympathetic to the honourable member's desire to support small businesses, but I am unpersuaded that this amendment is the best way to do it. All the measures in the budget had tax information and impact notes published with the budget, and I would remind everyone listening that this was a good budget for small businesses. As the Federation for Small Businesses said on the day, against a challenging backdrop, today's budget shows a clear...
Finance Bill, not budget. We are debating the Finance Bill and the amendments to it.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Simply intending to illustrate why the changes proposed tonight and in this House don't actually help what the government's attempting to achieve via the Finance Bill. So, as the FSB said, this budget shows a clear direction in business policy now for the whole of this Parliament to target support at small businesses rather than big corporates. As other members have stated, this government is supporting SMEs by more than doubling the employment allowance, by keeping the small profits rate stable, maintaining the annual investment allowance and freezing the small business rates multiplier. So I ask members not to forget that this is an important piece of legislation underpinning measures announced at the budget that will help fix the NHS, improve public services, incentivise capital investment and rebuild Britain.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This Finance Bill implements the 2024 autumn budget, and that was a bad budget, and this is a bad bill. It punishes businesses, discourages entrepreneurship, and raises taxes on those trying to make a living. It will lead to job losses, reduced investment, and higher prices. It will lead to higher interest rates and higher government debt, which will lead to lower growth. If you wanted to make a list of things that our economy didn't need, then this Finance Bill would be a good starting point. This Finance Bill is built on broken promises, and the amendments tabled try and help the government to keep its promises in its manifesto. During the election, Labour told the public their plans were fully costed and fully funded. Their manifesto said they would increase spending by £11 billion. So how can they now justify an increase in spending of £70 billion a year, funded by an extra £40 billion in taxes and £30 billion in borrowing? Because even if you believe the fairy story of the black hole told by the benches opposite, which I do not, 11 billion plus 22 billion does not equal 70 billion. Is not the truth that the Labour Party always planned a large increase in taxes and borrowing, but didn't have the courage to tell the British people in advance? Now, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister insisted that working people would be protected, But it's clear now that either they were wrong, or they don't consider small business owners, publicans or farmers to be working people. Happy to give way.
Honourable member for giving way. And does he not recognise that one of the primary challenges faced by some of those sectors that he mentioned is that of workers' inability to afford to live in the areas where they work, such as in Cornwall, and that actually the changes to stamp duty land tax will go a long way to improving the ability of workers to be housed in what are currently, in so many cases in Cornwall, second homes? Does he not recognise the potential contribution of that to the workforce?
Sir Ashley Fox.
Well, I'm sure that there are one or two good parts to this finance bill, but I'm afraid the honourable gentleman was elected on a manifesto that said he would increase spending by £11 billion, and that was fully costed. Yet this finance bill increases spending by £70 billion. And I just wondered why he and his honourable friends didn't have the courage to put that before the British people at the election. Now, small and medium-sized enterprises and the hard-working entrepreneurs that run them are the backbone of our economy. And they are the victims of this finance bill. In constituencies like Bridgwater, where SMEs are key to local prosperity, the government has imposed a huge national insurance hike that makes it more expensive to employ people. This rise, which breaks Labour's manifesto commitment not to raise national insurance, will cost SMEs £732 more per year for every employee earning £20,000. This tax on jobs will stifle growth and lead to higher unemployment. This rise in national insurance is especially damaging to those in the healthcare sector, and the amendments proposed will help assess the damage that this causes. Last week, Madam Deputy Speaker, representatives from the social care...
In the interests of complete impartiality, can I make sure that all members are aware they have to be speaking to the amendments as proposed in this finance bill, not any other amendments they might have wished to have seen proposed. Sir Ashley Fox.
I'm grateful for your guidance, Madam Deputy Speaker. The members from Bridgwater of the social care sector were particularly concerned that the national insurance contributions rise had not been subject to an assessment, and therefore assessing the damage that would do, and indeed the other tax rises, is critical to the successful implementation of this finance bill.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Happy to give way.
Joe Robertson.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way and for his assessment of the finance bill. Does he agree with me that the best way the government can raise revenue is not to raise taxes but to grow the economy and increase the money taken through taxes in that way? And the national insurance contributions are actually, the increases are delivering the very opposite of what the government say, not growing the economy at all, but stifling the economy, which is likely to demand an increase in taxes in the future.
Sir Ashley Fox.
I'm grateful for the intervention. Indeed, combined with the rise in the minimum wage and Labour's employment rights bill, the contents of this finance bill do seem to deliberately set out to harm small businesses. And Labour's plan to introduce inheritance tax on farmers and family businesses is more evidence, if it were needed, that they don't understand how farms and small businesses work. Under this government, a family farm with land, buildings and machinery worth, say, £5 million will incur IHT of £400,000 when it passes to the next generation. That same farm might produce a return of, say, 1% or £50,000 in an annual average year. So the government is proposing to take all that family's income for the next 8 years. And a question for the Minister when he replies: how does he expect that family to live in the meantime? Now, Labour's response to our farmers has been to sneer at our rural communities. The Treasury offered a minister to farming representatives and then spent that time telling them that there wasn't a problem. This is not just bad for farmers, but it's bad for rural economies and our nation's food security. Madam Deputy Speaker, this finance bill increases taxes and spending and borrowing. It makes our public sector larger and the private sector smaller. It does exactly the opposite of what is required. If we want a prosperous society, we need to encourage enterprise. We need low and simple taxes that incentivise people to work hard, to invest and to grow their businesses. This finance bill does exactly the opposite, and that is why we will oppose it this evening.
If there are no further speakers. Nesil Caliskan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank members so far, and I do indeed have great enthusiasm for the finance bill, including the opposition member's contribution during that finance bill, and I thank him for his efforts alongside the Minister at the time over several days as I sat through the finance bill. I speak, Madam Deputy Speaker, in favour of the finance bill as a member of the committee, and a bill that I recognise that seeks the government's mission to turn the page of what was a period of decline for the country. There are several aspects of the bill in particular that I'd like to focus on, and to begin with the non-dom status proposals from the government, which I see as a crucial part of our agenda to make sure we are delivering a fair approach to taxation in this country. The non-dom loophole, alongside extending the levy on oil and gas companies, and indeed ending the VAT exemption provided to private schools, through this bill raises the necessary income in order to be able to deliver what the government is trying to do, which is a balanced budget that seeks to stabilise the economy and then to grow our economy going forward. Madam Deputy Speaker, the non-dom... Yes, I'm very happy to give way.
Grateful to the Honourable Lady. If it turns out that the energy profits levy, lugged up to even higher levels, actually leads to a lower tax take than would have happened if it were at a lower level, would she at that point think that it was a mistake and urge her colleagues to change course, if that were to prove to be the case?
Thank you very much, and I thank the member for giving way. And I think ministers have provided assurance that of their assessment they don't believe that will be the case, but actually it is a rounded approach that the government is taking to energy, alongside our commitments around GB energy and our commitment to see a transfer from to more renewable energy going forward, will allow there to be a more mission-led approach. I take the right honourable member's point, but I think the government has provided assurances that there will be constant monitoring, and if changes are required, that they would deliver that.
On that point.
Yes, I'm very happy to give way.
I'm grateful. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way. She will be very aware that there is a mechanism within the government's energy profits levy which will kick in 2030, which is that if energy profits, if energy prices start to go down, then of course the levy ceases to work. So there's a very intrinsic link between the money that the energy companies pay and energy prices. And would she agree with me that whilst energy prices have gone up for the third time in a row, and many constituents, all of our constituents, are struggling with energy prices, it's right that the big oil and gas companies pay their fair share, but when energy prices come down, then the levy will stop.
I thank the member for her contribution, and the principle of being able to use a mechanism to intervene in a market that isn't working, I absolutely support, and I think the government's approach is right. There is an immediate issue with high pricing, certainly, but the truth is that the government has to be able to take decisions for the long run. And so, as I alluded to earlier, I'm conscious that also the Speaker may intervene in terms of me focusing on clauses, but as I alluded earlier, I think a long-term approach to making sure we have a just transition that sees that energy is stabilised for people across the country on a long-term basis is really important. I'm going to make a little bit of progress, and then I'm happy to give way to the member. So I think the government's approach to energy levies is the right one. I think our focus on maintaining particular clauses around VAT on private schools is important. And also, as I've said, Madam Deputy Speaker, the non-dom status is crucial. I'm happy to give way if the member would like to give way.
I thank the member for giving way. I just wanted to briefly just go back to what she was saying about the energy profits levy and stability. The energy profits levy is expected to cause huge amounts of instability for North Sea firms, driving away investment, driving down employment, driving businesses away from the North Sea to put their investments abroad. Does that sound like stability? And if it is that sort of the stability that's actually going to bring lower prices and employment and economic growth to the country? Because it doesn't really sound like stability or sort of the investment environment that we're looking for.
Well, I think the government's, thank you very much to the member, I think the government's commitment around investment through whether it's the wealth fund or private sector combination of GB Energy does in the long term bring stability to the sector. The truth is there is an energy crisis that is affecting my constituents and people across the country, and in this moment efforts have to be taken to make sure that we do everything we can to bring those prices down that people are experiencing in their bills on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to make some progress and I will conclude in a moment. So I think, politics is full of choices. The government has to balance the books. They have to take a decision to make sure we close what is a black hole. And so the choices that the government has made feel like the fairest of choices, and a long-term commitment to making sure that we have stability in the energy markets is the correct approach, whilst making sure that people who need help right now can benefit from that. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm happy to support the government's position on the finance bill. I think it is a bill that sets out the right choices, as I have said, and it is the first important step to making sure that the country is back on the road to recovery after a dark, dark period where people were impacted not just through an economic crash, but their day-to-day living through a cost of living crisis. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I call Paul Kohler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to speak on new clauses 7 and new clauses 8. As the MP for Wimbledon, I'm proud to represent a constituency with such a rich and diverse educational offering, including fantastic primary and secondary schools, both the independent and state sectors. But recent government decisions, including the increase in employers' NI contributions on all schools, removal of business rates relief, position of VAT on school fees at independent schools, are pushing many in both the state and private sector to the brink. The latter changes to independent schools have caused considerable concern in my constituency, as can clearly be seen by the over 1,000 signatures from my constituents on the petition discussed or debated in Westminster Hall today. It is my party's belief that as Liberals, education should not be taxed and individuals should be able to freely make choices about how their children are educated. The ambition should be to reach a point where the state offering of schools is so high that no parent feels particularly compelled to send their children to independent schools. However, these ideologically driven policies of taxing education are not the solution, simply putting further strain on the state sector, whilst also financially hitting those who make what they believe is the best choice for their child. A piece of red meat to show the red flag is still fluttering on those benches opposite. Admittedly, the long-term impact of these changes will have on schools is still to be seen, but the early signs are not good. This academic year, we've already seen a drop in pupils at independent schools of 10,000. Yes, 10,000, 3 times higher than the government estimated. Many believe this will not be a one-off event, but the start of a longer period, with more pupils expected to leave independent schools in the coming years and making any financial gains to improve the state sector illusory. It's important to note that this cost per pupil is likely to be larger than the national average due to the sheer number of students in the independent sector with special educational needs. The Independent Schools Council estimate there are over 130,000 pupils in independent schools with special educational needs, 90,000 of these receiving SEND support with no EHCP. Independent schools in my constituency, such as the Hall, in Wimbledon High School and Olney Prep School, to name but 3, do a huge amount to support children with special educational needs, and many parents choose to send their children there for that reason alone. I spoke to many parents who have made tough financial sacrifices to send their children to these schools. They speak of the barriers to their children receiving the support they need in the state sector, including long waiting lists to receive an EHCP. But these changes are already forcing many to reconsider their decision, They simply can no longer afford to use the private sector to relieve pressure on the state system. As is well documented, there are huge issues around the provision of SEND support in state schools, with many children waiting years for support and many schools, due to budget restraints, being unable to provide the support they would like. So at a time when the government and local council are already struggling to support schools with the money they need for SEND support, avoiding further strain on state schools is vital. These decisions are doing the opposite. Turning to new Clause 8, may I draw the House to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests. I would now like to speak specifically on the impact this bill will have on the wine industry and the nighttime economy and hospitality in general. Under the current wine easement, 85% of all wine sold in the UK is subject to the same rate of duty. With the alcohol duty now set to be linked to the volume of alcohol in each bottle of wine, that will be replaced by 30 different rates of duty. Whilst I understand the government's broader intentions, this new regime is simply not workable in the context of wine. It fails to account for the fundamental difference between wine and other, more manufactured drinks. The ABV of wine cannot be predicted with precision before or during the winemaking process. The alcohol content is stable only at the point when the wine goes into the bottle. The ABV varies between different years and different vats. Until bottling, we do not know the ABV of a particular bottle. It therefore creates huge uncertainty about price and profit margins for the industry. There are different rates of duty depending on the specific ABV, down to a gradation of 0.1%. It's particularly important with low-cost wines. The point is that this regime is utterly impractical for wine producers and wine merchants. Hal Wilson, the co-founder of Cambridge Wine Merchants, told me, "In my business, this feels like death by 1,000 cuts, or even 2,000 cuts. We sell over 2,000 different wines each year. From February, we'll need to know the precise ABV of each and every one for being able to calculate their full cost. For each 0.1% ABV difference, there's a different amount of tax to be paid." Now, I wrote to the Minister about this and received a long and detailed response, for which I'm grateful. He made the point that HMRC will change its practice, accept the ABV on the label of the bottle, which can be to the nearest 0.5%. But that is current practice, is not in the legislation as I understand it. It is still far too complex, and much of my criticisms still hold. Secondly, his letter fundamentally misunderstands why people drink wine. Wine is consumed primarily for taste, not strength. The ABV affects the taste profile. Compare a light Beaujolais with a robust Rioja. It's all about taste. What about whether it is stronger so one can get more drunk? That is not how people consume wine. Turning briefly to hospitality and the nighttime economy, the industry is facing an existential crisis owing to the cost of living crisis, rising energy prices, inflation, labour shortages following Brexit, changes to commuting patterns, and the more than doubling of business rates. Now is another increase in alcohol duties are to be yet another burden. Every incremental cost makes survival more difficult, as I know myself. And this finance bill shows the government is still not taking the dangers seriously. Thank you.
I call Jim Shannon.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's always a pleasure. Is it the end? No, I'm sure it's not. Madam, it's been a real pleasure to speak in this debate, and I thank you for calling me so soon, and as I'm just getting myself prepared for it. It's an opportunity to speak on the finance bill for the one last time. I've spoken on it every time I come to the chamber, and I'm very pleased to do so again. Within this finance bill, as the Shadow Minister stated in his contribution, which I thought was very helpful to setting the tone and the level for this debate and the issues that are important, he referred to the legacy of small and medium farms by the inheritance tax changes that need to be addressed by every opportunity until government understands the impact of devastation that will be wrought with farmers selling their land and their future to pay government. So I know the Minister, I sat beside him and we asked this question to him, and we asked for the threshold to be upheld and increased. If the threshold was increased by 1 million to 5 million for farms, it would help many farms find themselves outside of being penalised in relation to it. And government has an urgent need to promote food security within the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. This decision, I believe, beggars belief. If government are aiming for those abusing the system, then design a scheme for them, not a scheme which affects 70% of farmers in Northern Ireland and many other farmers across this great United Kingdom. The other major concern, of course, is that of the NI contributions, with GP clinics and health centres again being the latest to suggest reduced hours, less capacity, less response for their patients, simply because it's all done with the constraints of the national insurance contributions. Madam Deputy Speaker, this must not be the case. I support the opposition's new clause 2 in relation to energy, oil and gas. The Shadow Minister outlined the case extremely well. Others have spoken to it, and I agree with him. And our party will be supporting the amendment if the amendment is pushed, and I understand that it will be. In relation to the new clause 8, the honourable lady who spoke for the Lib Dems earlier on referred to the whisky and business and sectors, and I put the case forward for the sectors who have approached me, the Irish Whisky Trades Association. They have been very clear when I met them just before Christmas that this will impact upon them greatly. They're really under pressure, and most of the market, let's be honest, for the Irish whisky organisations and trade, they export most of their monies. Most of their whiskies to try and make their monies. But the fact of the matter is that they're finding that extremely difficult to try and do that. If they're tax heavier, then it will lead, very clearly they tell me, to job losses. It will lead to a reduction in what they're able to do, and they do some incredible work for the community. I mentioned the three of them in my constituency: Redeman, whisky, the Inch Distillery whisky, and Acklandville Distillery whisky. Again, those are three people and three organisations and three owners that I've known for all the time that they've had their businesses, and I'm concerned about how that will impact. Again, whenever the Honourable Lady pushes this one, and I hope she does, that we will support it.
For giving way, he will be acutely aware that there are huge supply chains, and actually some of these distillers are fantastic for actually attracting in people, the tourism industry, to create strong local economies as well. There's huge innovation going on in that industry. Would he agree with me that it's essential that the government doesn't just do an impact assessment of how much it costs and what the tax revenue is to the Treasury, but they look at the operational costs and the red tape over the 12 months before this measure comes in, because it's going to cause havoc?
The Honourable Lady has put it very succinctly and very well, and hopefully the Minister's listening to the comments of the Honourable Lady in relation to how it will impact, and her concerns are certainly my concerns, and I believe the concerns of all on this side of the chamber in relation to it. In new clause 4, again, the Honourable Lady had referred to the review of the impact on small and medium-sized enterprises. I would support that. I know that won't be put to a vote, I understand, but if it was, it'd be another one that I would and my party will support. I want to speak.
Give way on that point.
I'm very happy to, yes.
Very good. My old friend for giving way on that point. Does he share my concern that there seems to be a disconnect between some of the statements made on the government benches about the impact or lack of impact of some of these measures on small and medium-sized enterprises, and what we hear as constituency MPs week after week, where small businesses, family businesses, are telling us that they have, as a result of the measures in this finance bill, to reconsider much of their investment and recruitment plans for the coming years.
The Honourable is absolutely right, and that's what my small and medium enterprises are telling myself, and I believe everyone on this side of the chamber in relation to it as well. Ultimately, whenever the national insurance contributions are passed on to the businesses, then they will pass it on again to the customers. So who suffers? The wee man, the wee woman. The people that the Labour Party, the party of conscience, say they represent. But then again, they're going to penalise at this time, and again, it worries me greatly. I'm happy to, yes.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Does he agree with me that the national insurance contribution rises on small and medium-sized businesses not only gets passed on to the consumer, but it is damaging to the economy as a whole because it stifles growth. And growth is the way that you increase tax take for the Treasury, not increasing tax rates.
The honourable gentleman is right, and he's put it very well. One of my businesses, they employ, and my business, they employ 1,200 people. He told me just before in the new year that it would cost that firm £1.1 million per year. And when I asked him, and I said, "Well, what are you going to do? How are you going to? What are you going to do to address that loss or that extra money?" Well, there's two things we can do. He says, number one, he says we can absorb some of it. We can't absorb very much, and we'll pass it on. So that's exactly what's going to happen. So if you want to promote growth, then you have to look at how the aspects and the problems we'll have. I wish to speak, if I can, to New Clause 7. It's a one that perturbed me greatly. I used my intervention in the Shadow Minister in relation to private schools. A last-ditch effort to highlight the plight of the independent school. And again, I would say this is not designed as help to those who are in the wealthy elite. The ones that I know, they're not the ones who are driving the Rolls or who have a massive palatial house. These are ordinary people who are scrimping and saving to make sure they can send their children to the independent faith schools. They're not the ones who demand that their child has an access to a polo court or a swimming pool, although there is nothing wrong with this for parents who can afford to do it, and I'm not criticising anyone who is able to do that. My pleas are for those small schools of faith or international students who would be swallowed up in the mainstream system. And let me outline one example, and I want to do that if I can, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a Bangor Independent Christian School seek to do. They seek to provide a state standard of education within the sacrifice of their faith. The Bangor Christian School provide the standard GCSE English, and yet with a difference which comes as they lobby for a greater selection of books to focus on, books that did not push the boat out in terms of language or relationship scenarios, and parents were and are happy to pay additional towards this education to support this. My parliamentary aide tells me this story, and I'm going to give an example of an excerpt from it happened in my office as well. That she gave consideration to a private school, not because she thinks her children are above anybody else, but because she had a case come through our office in Newtownards with an excerpt from a book which is highly offensive to anyone of numerous faiths. That's of Christian faith, of Muslim faith, of Hindu faith, of indeed any person who has a faith. The book that they're referring to, the parent was told it's in the curriculum and the school will use it and not censor them books. No one asked for the censorship. They just asked for their child to be removed. Now that couldn't happen in the mainstream schools. And I have to say that their child was reading, they were concerned their child could be reading books which highlighted the allures of pornography without the problems of pornography. And there's something seriously wrong when that happens in a school. In the end, that person settled for a school because the ethos of the school is a Christian and a welcoming state school. So the fact that the government will penalise those schools with VAT to such an extent that some of those parents and their children will have to consider what their future will be. They've been pushed towards an education system that they're concerned with, and they haven't got the protection in that system. Madam Deputy Speaker, government must, and I say this respectively, the Minister knows my form, and I try to put things way forward, and hopefully every member tries to put it forward in a constructive fashion, but I try not to be aggressive in the way that I explain my viewpoint. I understand that the role of faith schools is imperative to give a structured, good education. This VAT clause has the potential to push parents into debt or close schools, and whilst homeschooling is great for those parents who have the ability and the desire, for those who don't, a high school education is, I have to say, a dangerous thing to attempt to provide without help. So it's for those children, and I conclude with this, Madam Deputy Speaker, and parents that I, at this last hour, seek to urge government to find a loophole for those small faith schools, or schools which focus on international pupils whose parents work here and who know their child needs that smaller focused class. For these children, I sincerely, Minister, urge a rethink. Move the threshold to large schools if that's who you're aiming for, or come up with a system that gives the small faith schools a chance to survive. Leave the small and the faith schools to educate children with a worldview that also has a nod, perhaps can I say, to parental values and concerns and to moral things as well. Madam Speaker, thanks so much.
Dave Doogan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll crack on with new clause 2 as it relates to the government's catastrophic mismanagement of the fiscal regime regarding Scotland's oil and gas. Just at a time where in December there, Norway's sovereign wealth fund touched €1.7 trillion. Scotland is no wealthier now than we were when North Sea oil and gas was discovered in real terms in the 1970s. More than £400 billion has flowed from Scottish waters to the Treasury over the years, with very little coming back the other way. Rather than reverse this trend, this Labour Party, with its increase to EPL, has chosen to accelerate it. A windfall tax, Madam Deputy Speaker, is supposed to be applicable to extraordinarily high profits from a high global oil price, that which preceded the introduction of the tax. But that level has long since gone. Through their changes to EPL, the Labour Party jeopardises investment and in doing so risks the future of our skilled offshore energy workforce and our ability to hit net zero. Analysis from OE UK shows that the increase and extension of EPL risks costing the economy £13 billion, and that this will in turn cost up to 35,000 jobs. The analysis also shows a reduction in viable capital investment offshore from £14.1 billion to £2.3 billion in the period 25 to 29 under the changes that the government is planning to EPL. This loss of economic value not only impacts the core sector itself, but the domestic onshore supply companies, many of whom are in my constituency and many of whom will have a role to play in the just transition. This reflects a political choice by the Labour Party to deprioritise investment in the decarbonisation agenda. Rather than allow a more valuable decarbonisation relief as the solitary positive byproduct of their tax hike, Labour have ensured that there can be absolutely no silver lining to this policy cloud. The simple truth is that the UK cannot be seen to meet the net zero targets or create green growth if the Labour Party's policies hack away at both investment and domestic workforces. We need to deliver the energy transition. It's clear that the Labour Party is abandoning Scotland's existing energy sector, and in so doing they're putting at risk the just transition into the process. With these changes to the EPL, Labour will have created a worst of all world scenario whereby they starve industry of investment, sacrifice the jobs that we need to deliver net zero, put at risk our energy security, won't bring down energy bills and harm the economy of Scotland, whilst failing to invest the money required to truly deliver the benefits we all need to see from the just transition. I'm very happy to give way.
Thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Does the Honourable Gentleman think there's a real challenge in terms of what the policies of the government are encouraging is the retreat from the North Sea much quicker, which will bring forward the decommissioning costs, which actually haven't been taken into account by the Treasury, and will add billions and billions and billions of pounds of extra cost onto the UK taxpayer?
Absolutely correct, because it doesn't matter where you look at the fiscal ambitions of the Labour government as it relates to North Sea oil and gas or energy more generally, it seems to be counterproductive. They introduce a policy, or they are currently introducing a policy, which they say has a stated aim, and anybody with a passing understanding of the industry realises it will have precisely the opposite aim, but they will not listen, much to my regret. Analysis from OE UK shows that the oil and gas sector's total tax yield will peak in 26 under Labour's increase to EPL before declining compared to the previous scenario, which continued to increase Treasury receipts over the period. The analysis shows that whilst the expected tax take from UK oil and gas producers would increase in the very short term, ultimately it will result in a £12 billion net loss to tax receipts compared to the current regime as implemented. If the Labour Party doesn't care about the jobs that this policy will cost, the harm it will do to the just transition, nor the damage to the economy of Scotland, surely they can accept that a tax increase which actually reduces the amount of tax received is at the very best counterproductive, Madam Deputy Speaker, and that's why the SNP will be supporting News Clause 2 if it's selected. On private schools, the SNP appreciates that the many and varied reasons why parents choose to use private schools are manifold. It is not fair nor sustainable to treat private schools' fees differently from other discretionary spend for the purposes of VAT. The VAT exemption offered to private schools cost the UK taxpayer around £1.6 billion annually, money which could be invested in other public services. However, the SNP also understands that for many parents whose children are enrolled in private schools, the UK Government's decision to remove that exemption from private schools will be extremely worrying and concerning time. The Scottish Government has sought to ensure that the distinctive nature of Scottish education system is understood by UK governments in this transition. In particular, the Scottish Government has raised concerns with the UK Government about the decision to include grant-aided special schools in this policy, as in Scots law they are not considered independent schools. There is a clear distinction in Scotland in educational law between grant-aided special schools and independent schools, and the UK Government policy regrettably does not reflect that. Now, I know the Minister studiously avoids almost everything I say, but I hope he's heard that, and I'd be very grateful if he could address that when he comes to sum up. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, on Scotch whisky. When the last Tory Government hiked whisky duty, tax revenue raised by the industry fell by £300 million. That should have been a salutary lesson to any government that comes afterwards. The sensible option for both supporting Scotch whisky and Treasury receipts would have been to cut whisky duty instead. The Labour Party is raising it again. On top of this, we now have a UK Government plan to grant a different definition of a single malt to English producers to that of Scottish single malts. The definition is entirely inconsistent with the global reputation of the quality of single malts and seeks to tear up a well-established dictionary definition of what a single malt is while pulling the rug from underneath Scotch whisky producers. The Government must listen to warnings from the industry, the Scottish Government and those from across the political spectrum, and scrap these plans and these duty hikes, which are an act of sabotage on Scotland's world-class industry. The industry is already facing the risk of Trump tariffs, which cost over £600 million in exports the last time these were applied under his first presidential term. Rather than further damage from the UK Government, the industry needs support, starting with the reversal of these plans to hike duty still further. It's high time that Westminster finally listened to organisations like the Scotch Whisky Association and stopped discriminating against Scotland's national drink, which supports more than 40,000 jobs and delivers more than £7.1 billion into the London Treasury every year. The SNP will support new Clause 8 if it is selected. In summary, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've spoken consistently about that which is under debate in this bill, but the wider context cannot be ignored. Labour have no cogent plan for reforming the economy. They seek to reduce the deficit and not raise taxes, and they want to stimulate growth with large investments. It's impossible to do all of these things all at once, and it's astonishing that the Government seem to persist with this willful ignorance. A government may increase spending to kickstart the economy and deliver growth and public services, but that requires tax increases and or deficit spending, both of which Labour are too scared to pursue because of their short-sighted election promises to abide by fiscal rules and not increase the highest revenue sources. So we're stuck in the worst of all possible worlds. Insufficient growth, especially green growth, investment and a deficit causing a rising debt burden and no way meaningfully increasing to revenue. A UK Government bizarrely persisting with gaslighting itself that it's fixing the foundations and delivering growth. They're doing nothing of the sort, and if they stick with this finance bill and the budget that predicates it, they never will. And finally, isn't it astonishing that when farmers push back on APR and family business push back on BPR and pensioners push back on the pension winter fuel allowance, Scotch whisky pushes back on duty hikes and North Sea oil and gas on EPL, when WASPy women push back, they all get told no, it's too bad, the situation's too bad, you've just got to suck it up. But when the nom-doms push back, they get swept right to the heart of the Treasury and this Chancellor, and they get whatever they want. That's your Labour Government.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to speak in favour of new Clause 4, tabled in the name of my honourable friend, the member for St Albans. This amendment, if accepted, would require the Government to carry out an impact assessment on the changes that this legislation would create for small and medium-sized businesses. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy, the heart of our local communities, and they create the jobs that we all rely on. I hear time and time again from the small businesses across my constituency of Richmond Park that they are struggling to keep up with soaring energy prices, business rates and the costs of exporting. Now, the Chancellor is absolutely right to be focused on economic growth. However, my Liberal Democrat colleagues and I are deeply concerned about the impacts of the changes of this bill on our high streets, particularly those in the hospitality industry, who are very concerned about wine, beers and cider and the duty rises and the impact that that will have. Now, the well-being of small businesses acts as an indicator of the health of the economy as a whole. So, as such, this amendment would provide a useful tool to allow us to understand the broader implications of this legislation on our economic prosperity. More broadly, an impact assessment, as this amendment would require, would look at the combined effect of all policies in this bill on small businesses, both direct and indirect, to ensure that SMEs remain at the heart of the government's economic policy. It's crucial that the necessary tough spending decisions to clear up the mess that the last Conservative government left behind do not hit our small local businesses, which are so vital to our economy. To encourage growth through our small businesses, the Chancellor should be looking to reduce the burden on businesses through means such as cutting Brexit red tape, securing better trade deals with Europe and entering a customs union. The combination of the cost of hiring staff, the cost of additional red tape and higher business rates simply will be too much for many SMEs to absorb, which is why I urge the Minister to support our amendment and assess the impact of this legislation on local businesses. I also wish to speak in favour of new clause 7. This new clause would require the government to produce an impact assessment of the effect of the VAT provisions in this bill on pupils who have special educational needs but do not have an educational health and care plan. The Liberal Democrats do not support imposing VAT on private school fees, and we do not support treating independent schools differently to other education providers for VAT purposes. It is unnecessary, unfair and counterproductive. Almost 100,000 privately educated pupils in the UK have special educational needs, yet do not have an EHCP. These children will face significant disruption to their education, as many parents will find that they cannot afford the sharp fee increase. The consequences of this bill will also be a steep rise in demand for local authorities to issue EHCPs and a rapid influx of pupils into the state system. Local authority resources for special educational needs and disabilities are already stretched to breaking point, and many state schools will struggle to cope with this additional demand. New Clause 7 demands transparency on the impact that this policy will have on pupils across the UK. This change will have a disproportionate impact on children with SEND, which will not just create hardship for those children and their parents, but also enormous difficulties for the local authorities and state schools that will be required to provide alternative schooling. So I urge the Government to back this amendment and reconsider this policy. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I call Graham Stuart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to take part in tonight's debate on the Finance Bill and the amendments and new clauses that have been submitted. Of course, this follows several days and this afternoon's remarkable session when the whole House, pretty much the whole House, came together to congratulate the Prime Minister on his composure and leadership on Ukraine. And looking forward, the need, as was made clear for us, to rebuild our military capability, our hard power, as this decade goes on, if we're to ensure the security of Ukraine, but also of Europe, including the UK and the wider world. And of course, it's in that context that this finance bill comes, because the only way to deliver that security is by having a strong economy. It's by having the economic growth, which colleagues from across the House have discussed. And yet this budget is the most growth-destructive budget imaginable. And it's worth, Madam Deputy Speaker, going back, as we look at these amendments and new clauses, to the context. After going through the pandemic, after going through the energy crisis, which, albeit in some ways, still continues, this country, thanks to the hard decisions made on this side of the House, though not always leading to popularity, in fact contributing to our electoral disaster in July last year, but I'm proud nonetheless that when that election came, inflation was back on target at 2%. We were the fastest growing economy in the G7. 4 million additional jobs had been created, Madam Deputy Speaker. That was the legacy. And what it needed from the incoming Labour government was an unprecedented majority and goodwill to get on and do something, was to hold its nerve, to recognise that the key components were put in place for the economic growth that was going to be vital to meet the demands of the NHS, of an ageing population, indeed of an ever more dangerous world. Instead, what we got from this Labour government was the most disastrous economic suicide note in history. And it's devastating for the popularity of the party opposite. Never has such a huge majority been squandered so quickly, if ever there's been one so large before. And that's why, when you look at new Clause 1, we look at issues like the tax that's going to be taken from a state pension. So someone whose only income is the state pension could be paying tax. Paying tax on that. That's a proposal from the Labour government. Forget the winter fuel payment being taken away as well. Is that really what members opposite came into here hoping to do? I don't think they did. And therefore, new Clause 1, making sure that we look at that, we understand that, and we look for opportunities to change it, is a sensible one. New Clause 3 looks at the overall tax impact on households. And again, that surely has to be right. And my honourable friend gave a very powerful speech at the beginning of this debate, and I fully supported the points that he made. We've heard powerful speeches from across the House on issues around special educational needs. And again, I would say to members opposite, really? Did you get elected to come in here and target children with special educational needs? There's 100,000 who don't have an education, health and care plan. That may not be because they're not eligible for one, it's just because they haven't got one. 100,000 who are in the private sector, and they are going to be forced out with no notice, no time to change and plan. It is a cruel policy, and it's one that the party opposite should be ashamed of. That's why Amendments 67 to 69, focusing on VAT on private schools, I fully support, as I do the new Clause 7 put forward by the Liberal Democrats and powerfully spoken about by the Honourable Lady on their front bench. On non-DOMs, we see the government, it is ironic, as colleagues have commented on, it seems like pensioners, small businesses, farmers, you name it, all the domestic interests who you might think that the government might want to listen, reflect, make some changes to lower the negative impacts. None of them have been listened to in the least. But non-DOMs, in Davos, the Chancellor's gone off there, there's some change on non-DOMs. But let's not let the government off entirely on that, because driving out the very rich who bring in a massively disproportionate amount of revenue to us is not a sensible thing to do. I mean, if you put equality above all other values, then of course, as socialists often do. I think wasn't it Churchill who said the vice of capitalism is its unequal sharing of blessings, and the virtue of socialism is its equal sharing of misery. Of course, one of the greatest ways of creating more equality in this country is drive all the rich people out, drive all the people out who invest and give us jobs, and take little from public services but contribute enormously to them. That of course, always goes down well with the union backers of the Labour Party. I promised I wouldn't go on for too long, and I'm going to sit down. But having said I think I would speak for 6 minutes, and it is now 6 minutes, it's interesting to note that I haven't talked about the main topic I was going to touch on, which was the oil and gas. And I said it earlier in intervention, but I really do appeal to the party opposite. Putting up taxes on oil and gas in the North Sea so that we see tens of thousands of job losses, we see a loss of engineering and other capacity in this country, which is vital to the transition to net zero. We don't, in response to the interaction I had with the Honourable Lady earlier, no one expects that we will see the tax take over coming years go up as a result of this. The tax take will go down. You can put the rate up to such a level that you actually get a lower tax take. And the Honourable Member for Angus and Perthshire spoke powerfully on this as well. And that's why I thought the Honourable Lady appeared to accept, and she seemed to have belief in the Minister on the front bench, that they would listen if it turned out that this was a short-sighted move. If, in fact, it just means that we import more oil and gas from abroad, which, by the way, almost always has a higher embedded carbon content than domestically produced oil and gas. If we do that, that doesn't benefit the environment. It certainly doesn't benefit all the jobs that we would have in this country, and it loses us tax revenue. It is truly a crazy policy. And I would certainly appeal to members opposite, especially the new members. I mean, we had the distinguished economist speaking earlier, retreading his speech for about the fourth time, little realising it was supposed to be focused on these particular amendments. But anyway, he did it with great good humour. But I would ask him to take his finely honed mind, address these issues, and if the oil and gas policy is as crazy as every expert witness says it is, then he and others should suggest that it should change course. The Honourable Lady said that the government should consider changing course if it didn't deliver what it was supposed to deliver, and I would ask members opposite to support the amendments that we put down tonight and certainly oppose this ridiculous bill, and I look forward to hearing from the Minister.
I call the Minister, James Murray.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, at the heart of the Prime Minister's plan for change is our mission to grow the economy to put more money in people's pockets. We are determined to make people better off. We know that investment and growth depend on the essential foundations of economic stability, fiscal responsibility and public services being on a firm footing. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, this government inherited a challenging and unsustainable set of future spending plans based on unfunded commitments that had not been shared with the OBR or the British people. No responsible government could have let things carry on as they were. That is why, at the autumn budget, my right honourable friend the Chancellor set out the government's plans to fix the foundations of the economy and deliver change, a plan to protect working people, fix public services, including the NHS, and rebuild Britain. This has meant taking difficult decisions on tax, spending and welfare to repair the public finances and support investment in public services, but the government has done this whilst protecting people's payslips. We have also ensured that the UK is one of the best places in the world to grow a business, with corporation tax capped at 25% and reforms that will support small businesses and the British High Street. This finance bill represents the next step in delivering on the autumn budget by legislating for several key manifesto commitments, supporting businesses to invest and implementing reforms to the tax system. Now, I thank all honourable members for their contributions during this debate, and before I turn to the individual amendments, I would like to briefly address some of the points they made. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for Loughborough for setting out the importance of growth and making people better off, and for his thorough analysis of all of the amendments and new clauses in the bill, I seem to recall. Or perhaps that was, in fact, my honourable friend for Dartford, who did go through all of the new clauses, and I very much thank him for his contribution. I also thank my honourable friend from Barking, and I thank her indeed for being on the Finance Bill Committee, though I note she described as sitting through the Finance Bill Committee rather than thoroughly enjoying that episode. I thank honourable members opposite also for their contributions to the debate. The honourable member for Bridgwater recognised that even in his view there were a few points he could agree with in our bill, which I welcome. The honourable member for Wimbledon, he was concerned in some of his comments, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll give way.
Invite the Minister to explain how the budget would improve the lot of farmers. And in particular, the example I gave of the £5 million family farm that would incur an inheritance charge of £400,000, how will that family pay that out of an annual income of about £50,000? That's 8 years' income with nothing to live on.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. And now, of course, this finance bill and this debate has to focus on matters which are within the finance bill and are matters of new clauses and amendments. And as he will know, and as the previous Deputy Speaker reminded him, he did stray rather outside of the ambit of the finance bill by referring to important changes to agricultural property relief, but not ones which are dealt with by this finance bill or any new clauses or amendments. I would gently point out to him that any of his constituents, whatever industry they work in, will see that the income tax on their earnings will not go up as a result of this government keeping its commitment in that regard. I will give way.
The Minister to give way, and he's right to point to the amendments we have in front of us. So we have new clause 3, which looks at the income in households specifically. If he's so confident in the measures he's putting forward and the measures put forward by the Chancellor, why won't he accept new clause 3 as an ability to show just how fantastic the budget and the financial bill is in the evidence base that we have?
Well, I was quite hoping the honourable gentleman would again leap to the defence of Liz Truss, as he did just last week, but sadly that wasn't to be the case in his intervention today. I will, of course, come to the new clauses in a moment, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm only halfway through thanking people on his side of the House for intervening, so perhaps if he'll make me make a little progress, I would be grateful. The honourable member for Wimbledon spoke about his concerns that it will be unworkable when the wine easement ends, but of course the wine easement ended over a month ago, and our early indications are that firms, warehouse keepers and HMRC have adapted well to the new system, though of course I and my officials will carefully monitor that situation. I will give way.
Minister, has he actually spoken to people in the wine industry? They are absolutely at their wits' end about this.
Yeah. I've been in routine contact with people from the wine industry throughout my time as Exchequer Secretary, and my officials are also in touch with the industry. But as I said, the end of the wine easement happened at the beginning of February, and our early indications are that firms, warehouse keepers and HMRC have adapted well. The honourable member for Strangford made a rare early speech during this debate, which rather took me by surprise also, Madam Deputy Speaker. But he raised his points with typical grace and forthrightness. One point, I will address some of his points later in my remarks, but on the point around some of the firms who export spirits and the impact of changes in the finance bill on them, I'd of course remind him that duty does not apply to exports, so that part of the legislation wouldn't be relevant for those considerations. The honourable member for Angus and Perthshire, Glens, spoke about several topics. Briefly to address two of them, he spoke about the energy profits levy, which I'll come to more substantively in a moment. But just briefly to underscore the fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the government is committed to managing the energy transition in a way that supports jobs in existing and future industries, and of course GB Energy will be based in Aberdeen. And in relation to his question around schooling in Scotland, if I understood his question correctly, so in line with the approach taken with special schools in the rest of the UK, grant-aided special schools in Scotland will remain in scope of this policy. Now, the block grants that the Scottish Government provide to grant-aided special schools fall outside of the scope of VAT, as they're not pupil-specific. Funding that local authorities pay for individual pupils will be subject to VAT, but local authorities can reclaim that VAT via the Section 33 VAT refund scheme. So I hope that goes some way towards answering his questions. The honourable member for Richmond Park spoke to the Lib Dem amendments, which I'll turn to in just one moment. And the honourable member for Beverley and Holderness. I always enjoy his contributions, always interested to hear what he has to say, but I do note he seems to have developed rather a blind spot when it comes to remembering the inheritance that we had from the previous government which he supported. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I may turn to the amendments the government and then the opposition have tabled at report stage. As honourable members will be aware, one measure that this bill delivers is our commitment to remove the outdated concept of domicile status from the tax system. From April the 6th, 2025, this will be replaced by a new residence-based regime, ensuring that everyone who makes their home in the UK pays their taxes here, with our approach raising an additional £12.7 billion in revenue over the forecast period. The government is clear that our new residence-based regime will be internationally competitive and focused on attracting the best talent and investment to the UK. This was very complex legislation, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it was therefore the government's expectation that amendments would be required during the parliamentary passage of the bill to ensure the drafting aligns with the policy intention, and accordingly we are tabling minor technical changes and administrative easements that will ensure the regime works as intended. Madam Chair, turning first to the amendments that relate to the new four-year foreign income and gains regime. The government is making technical changes to the legislation that will ensure any claims by individuals for relief on foreign income and gains are properly accounted for with regards to access to other forms of tax relief. Further amendments make changes to maintain the competitiveness of the new regime by ensuring equal treatment of gains in trusts that migrate to the UK and those that do not, for the purposes of relief on those gains. Turning to amendments to Clause 40 in Schedule 9, which abolishes the remittance basis of taxation from April the 6th. These amendments make changes to correct references to domicile found in other legislation, as well as ensuring the rules around remittances of intangible assets work as intended. In addition, these amendments will ensure that individuals who have made remittances whilst non-resident for a long period will not be taxed if they use the amounts previously remitted after having resumed their UK residence. turning to the amendments relating to the Temporary Repatriation Facility, or the TRF. These changes were announced by my Right Honourable friend the Chancellor in January, and they are intended to address specific concerns raised by non-DOMs and experts about the operation of the TRF. Together, these amendments will ensure that the legislation aligns with the policy intent and ultimately increase the amount of trust distributions that can be designated by addressing specific barriers to use in the TRF. Further amendments address inconsistencies with Clause 41, with the effect of making the TRF easier to use and ensuring the new residence-based regime works as intended. Turning to the amendments in relation to the taxation of foreign income and gains arising in settler-interested trusts. These changes will ensure the legislation functions as intended, including by expanding the TRF to cover trust distributions as previously explained, and by incorporating changes based on feedback from external stakeholders. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government is also proposing 11 technical amendments to the new residence-based system for inheritance tax. These changes ensure that the new rules work as intended by addressing a mismatch between the new long-term UK residence test and the old inheritance tax rules for deemed domicile for operating within several of the UK's double taxation agreements. The Government is also tabling several amendments to provide clarification on the treatment of existing excluded property trusts, whilst also relaxing the test for whether the inheritance tax carve-out applies. As a result, the property will only need to be offshore immediately before the transfer or the settler's death, rather than being kept offshore until that time. This easement will enable trusts to invest in the UK in the interim, thereby helping to grow the economy. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the Finance Bill not only delivers on our plan to repair the public finances, but also supports the investment necessary for long-term economic growth. Such investment is, of course, crucial in clean energy, on which the Prime Minister's plan for change makes clear we are committed to securing the UK's place as a global leader. That is why we are supporting the repurposing of oil and gas assets for use in carbon capture, usage and storage by legislating to allow tax relief on payments made into decommissioning funds. I will move on, Madam Deputy Speaker. I perhaps may not go into as much depth as I'd hoped in referring to some of the further amendments, as I'm getting very well attuned to the subtle signals from my honourable friend. No, I'm going to make a bit of... Well, OK, one more time.
So who is gracious, if not always in the best books with the whips. Could I ask him, does he expect pensioners reliant solely on the state pension to get drawn into into tax and the need to produce a tax return? Has he made an assessment of that, and what kind of numbers would there be?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and as he will be aware, in the coming financial year, 25-26, the personal allowance is above the level of a new state pension, so in cases where that is people's sole income, that should not apply, although there are individual cases of pensioners now, obviously, who already do owe tax, and indeed around two-thirds of pensioners, I believe it is, do pay tax because they also have private pensions and they pay via PAYE or self-assessment. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will not go into detail about the government amendments to visual effects relief because I assume we have the consent of the whole House to accept them. I may briefly speak to some of the amendments tabled by opposition members, as I feel I should address them together. I will take together the new clauses 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 and 8 because these amendments would require the government to review the number of individuals receiving the full state pension and their income tax liabilities in the next 4 years, and to publish various impact assessments regarding the impact of changes to the energy profits levy, as well as the impact of this bill on households, small and medium-sized enterprises, distilleries, wine producers and the hospitality industry. Now, the government remains opposed to all of these amendments for the same reason that I gave at committee stage. First, the relevant information on those receiving state pension and their tax liabilities is already published by HMRC, DWP and the OBR and is publicly available. I will give way.
Minister, for giving way. In new Clause 8 on alcohol pricing, we've made it explicitly clear that we're not just looking for an impact assessment of the tax that the government intends to raise. It's about the estimate of administrative operational costs, i.e. red tape that's going to be put on the industry. Would he agree with me that we do need that impact assessment, and will he meet with me to discuss how we can do it?
Well, in relation to the alcohol duty changes and indeed the energy profits levy, the impacts of those changes have already been set out in the tax information and impact note, which is published in autumn budget. So the information is already in the public domain. And thirdly, Madam Deputy Speaker, information on the impact on households was also published in autumn budget in the Impact on Households report, which demonstrated that households are on average better off in 25-26 as a result of these decisions. I will finally just address the amendments made by the opposition to the VAT on private school fees, as several honourable members spoke about that matter. These amendments, Amendments 67 to 69, would collectively remove clauses 47 to 49, which are those that remove the VAT exemption for private schools and set out anti-forestalling provisions and the commencement date. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, ending the VAT tax break for private schools is a tough but necessary decision that will secure the additional funding needed to help deliver on our commitments, including those relating to education and young people. This policy took effect at the beginning of January, and I note that in his speech, the Shadow Minister did not say how his party would pay for their decision to reintroduce this tax break for private schools. This policy will raise £1.7 billion by the final year of this Parliament, and so it is of course essential for the opposition to explain what they would cut from the schools budget, or from education services, or from any other public services to pay for it. I will happily give way if the Shadow Minister would like to make an intervention to place on record how he will pay for the reintroduction of this tax break. I don't see him leaping to his feet, Madam Deputy Speaker, so I will therefore move on. Finally, on the VAT on private schools debate that we're having, the government set out at autumn budget the expected impacts of this policy, so I do not believe that new clause 7, which would require the government to make a regular statement on the impact on pupils with special educational needs and disabilities, is necessary. However, I would like to take this opportunity to make clear that in developing this policy, the government carefully considered the impact it would have, including on pupils with special educational needs and disabilities, and I'm sure the Honourable Member for St Albans and her colleagues will welcome the extra £1 billion for high needs funding next year that we have been able to announce thanks to our decision on tax policy, including on private schools. Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, I would urge I hope I have set out why the opposition amendments are unnecessary, or indeed why reintroducing the VAT tax break for private schools not only runs counter to the manifesto on which the government was elected, but also represents an unfunded tax cut from the opposition. Have they learnt nothing? I therefore urge the House to reject these amendments and to accept, and I commend our amendments to the bill, and I again extend my thanks to all members for their contributions during this debate.
I call Shadow Minister James Wilde to wind up. Is the Shadow Minister going to withdraw his motion?
To withdraw new clause 1.
Is it the wish of the House that new clause 1 be withdrawn? New clause 1 by leave withdrawn. New clause 2 has been selected for separate decision. I call James Wilde to move new clause 2 formally.
Move formally.
Oil and gas profits levy impact assessment of increases in rate.
The question is that new clause 2 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye! Of the contrary, no. No! Division, clear the lobby. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Katie Law, Gregory Stafford. Tellers for the noes, Kay Mather and Taiwo Owatame. order.
The ayes to the right, 113. The noes to the left, 331.
The ayes were 113, the noes were 331. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlocked. New Clause 8 has been selected for separate decision. I call Daisy Cooper to move New Clause 8 formally.
Move formally, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Review of sections 63 and 64.
The question is that New Clause 8 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no.
No!
Division, clear the lobby. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Susan Murray, Charlie Maynard. Tellers for the noes, Kay Mather, Taiwo Owatami.
ayes to the right, 176. The noes to the left, 332.
The ayes were 176, the noes were 332. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. With the leave of the House, I call the Minister to move Government Amendment 1 to 17 formally.
Move formally.
The question is that Government Amendments 1 to 17 be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Amendment 67 has been selected for separate decision. I call James Wilde to move the amendment formally.
Move formally.
The question is that Amendment 67 be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby. The question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Katie Lamb, Gregory Stafford. Tellers for the noes, Kea Mather, Taiwo Watami.
367. The noes to the left, 347.
The ayes were 167, the noes were 347. The noes have it, unlocked. With the leave of the House, I call the Minister to move Government Amendments 18 to 66 formally.
Move formally.
The question is that Government Amendments 18 to 66 be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Consideration completed. Third reading.
Now.
I beg the Minister to move third reading. Minister James Murray.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that the bill be read a third time. At the autumn budget, Madam Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend the Chancellor laid the essential foundations for boosting investment and growth to put more money in people's pockets, the #1 mission of this government under the Prime Minister's plan for change. The budget was built on robust fiscal rules that put a stop to day-to-day spending being funded through borrowing and to get net financial debt falling as a share of GDP. The Finance Bill delivers on our manifesto commitments, removing the outdated concept of domicile status from the tax system, increasing the capital gains tax rate for carried interest, increasing the higher rates of stamp duty for additional dwellings, introducing the 20% standard rate of VAT on private school fees, and changing the energy profits levy by extending the period over which it applies and adjusting its rate by 3 percentage points. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we know, my right honourable friend the Chancellor set out a budget how the fiscal inheritance was far worse than we had expected. The opposition, when in government, let public spending plans become unsustainable. They did not share this with the OBR or the British people, and it fell to us to fix that mess when we took office. That is why we had to make an increase to the capital gains tax, changes to inheritance tax thresholds, and we led our plan to close the tax gap by a record package of £6.5 billion of additional tax revenue by the end of the Parliament. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to thank honourable and right honourable members from across the House for their often helpful and insightful contributions to the debates of this bill during its passage. I would like to thank officials at the Treasury and in Parliament for their work on the policies and the legislation that have led to the bill whose consideration we are now concluding. This bill plays a vital role in delivering economic stability, repairing the public finances and laying the essential foundations for growth. It is through that growth that we will put more money into the pockets of people across Britain, and I commend it to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time. I call Shadow Minister James Wilde.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I join in thanking honourable members on both sides of the House who've participated in the full debates that we've had so far on the bill, which I don't intend to extend unduly, and I join in thanking the parliamentary staff and honourable members who chaired the committee. Madam Deputy Speaker, the driving mission of this government, according to the Prime Minister, is growth. But despite inheriting the fastest growing economy in the G7, he and the Chancellor chose to talk down our economy. The impact of their words was to weaken confidence. Then, in the October budget, the government made choices and put in place a raft of measures in this and other bills that have stopped growth stone dead. £40 billion a year of extra taxes, higher national insurance, increasing tax on investors, deterring the risk takers and the wealth creators that we need, pushing up inflation, hitting working people and pensioners. In just the last 2 days, senior business leaders from retail and hospitality sector have warned of the damage that this budget and Labour's costly employment laws will have. They're just the latest businesses sounding the alarm, but the Chancellor isn't listening. For all the talk of growth, what we can already see from this government and their actions is we have a government committed to higher taxes, higher spending, more borrowing and more regulation, the classic Labour approach, and it does not work. The government needs to change course, otherwise we will all pay the price. And that's why we will not be supporting this bill this evening.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time. And as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, clear the The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No!
Tellers for the ayes, Kay Mather, Taiwo Owatami. Tellers for the noes, Katie Lamb and Gregory Stafford. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 339. The noes to the left, 172.
The ayes were 339, the noes were 172, so the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Unlock.
We'll give the front benches a moment just to swap over.